Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Mishnah Mastery. It's so good to have you all on board. Welcome to our live virtual studio audience on Zoom. Yeah, they're a quiet bunch, but they are there. So we are going to do Zevachim. We are into Seder Kodshim. We started the first chapter of Zevachim last week. And we are now in the second chapter of Zevachim, so we're going to get that up on the screen over here. And, that's actually chapter 1, so let's go straight to chapter 2. And we're going to get it up on the screen as well on Zoom. And this is very, very exciting. We are going to carry on in the world of sacrifices. We're here for a long, long time. And we're going to be starting in chapter 2, Mishnah 1, talking about the actual service of the korban, of a sacrifice. So we mentioned last week that there are 4 stages for a korban to be processed and for it to be valid. We talked about how there's the shechita, there's the slaughtering. We talked about how there's the kabbalat hadam, the receiving of the blood in a utensil, in a bowl. Then there's the holacha, which is transporting the blood from the place of the sacrifice to the altar. And then there's zrika, which is where some of the blood is sprinkled onto the mizbeach, onto the altar. So shechita, interestingly, can be done by anybody. Doesn't have to be done by a kohen, and that's what we're going to see at the beginning of this Mishnah. From that moment, from the shechita and onwards, so from Kabbalah, holacha, and zrika, those actions have to be done by a kohen. But a shechita, the actual slaughtering, can be done by anybody. So what we're going to see is, in the first Mishnah here, the people who are now not allowed to do any of the other processes. So it says the Mishnah, Mishnah Aleph, chapter 2, Perek Beis. Kol hazvachim shekibel daman zar. So we're going to see there's 12 people that we're going to list over here. So any sacrifice where the blood is received by a zar, by a non-kohen, a foreigner to the priestly tribe, let's say. So if it was a zar who collects the blood, or an onain, if you recall, an onain is somebody who is waiting to bury a deceased relative. Tavul yom, which we've also seen before, is someone who's waiting till sunset to be considered tahor. He went to the mikveh in the morning, and he now has to wait till sunset to have his status as a tahor person finalized. Mechusar begadim, which is a kohen, so really they should be able to do the service, but it's a kohen who is lacking the required uniform, the 4 items of clothing that makes up a kohen's uniform. He's not got all of those in place. Mechusar kippurim, this is a person who is lacking atonement, so he is waiting till the following morning before he completes his his process. So he would have been impure, he would have gone to the mikveh, he would have waited till sunset, but in this instance it's a person who also has to wait till the next morning. Number 6 is shalol rechutz yadayim raglaim, a kohen who has not ritually washed his hands and his feet. Arel, which is a person who is uncircumcised. Tamei, which is a person who is impure. Now, hold on a minute, you'll be thinking, how can a tamei person do shechita? And yet, actually, if he, in theory, had an extremely long knife and was standing outside of the Beit HaMikdash, he could do the shechita for his korban. I'm not saying it was widely practiced, but it is, in theory, possible. Yoshev is a kohen, but he is sitting when he is doing the part of the process. So he's receiving the blood sitting, or whatever it might be. So you're not allowed to sit, you have to be standing when you're serving in the Beit HaMikdash. Omeid al gabe kelim. Not only that, but your feet have to be touching the floor. So if you're standing on other things, other pots, pans, vessels, whatever it might be, if you're not standing on the floor, then it's going to be invalid. Al gabe bahema, or if a person is on top of an animal. Al gabe ragle chavera, or even if you're walking, you're barefoot, your mate is barefoot, and you're walking on his feet. Even then, it's not going to work. Says the Mishnah Pasal. In all of these instances, if Kabbalah and onwards is done by one of these 12 types of people, the korban is going to be pasal. It is going to be disqualified. It is going to be unfit. Says the Mishnah, kibel basmol. If a person receives the blood in his left hand, not literally on his left hand, but he's holding the bowl in his left hand to receive the blood, the Mishnah says, pasal, it's going to be disqualified. A kohen has to be serving any action, any service that a kohen does in the Beis Hamikdash is supposed to be done with their right hand. Rabbi Shimon, however, machshir. Rabbi Shimon disagrees. Rabbi Shimon is of the opinion that only the zorika on the altar, only the sprinkling has to be done with the right hand, which means that if the Kabbalah was done in the left hand, Rabbi Shimon is going to accept that and say that it is going to be kosher still. Nishpach hadam ala ritzpa v'asafo. All right, so if blood spills on the floor and then it's gathered up. So when it comes to the Kabbalah Sadam, when it comes to receiving the blood, they had to collect it, they had to receive it into the bowl straight from the wound. So they would do the shechita, they would sever the neck, and then the blood, the life blood that comes out of the animal's neck has to go straight into this bowl. It's not supposed to come from the floor. So the Mishnah says, Nishpach adam ala ritzpa v'asafo, if the person scoops up some blood from the floor, then pasul. The Mishnah says it's going to be disqualified. You haven't done that particular part of the process properly. Nisano al gabe akelesh, if you sprinkle the blood on the ramp of the altar, okay, that's not where the blood is supposed to be sprinkled. It's supposed to be sprinkled, well, we'll see more details about the outer perimeter of the Mizbeach. Are we familiar in some way, shape or form with what the Mizbeach looked like? So if they did it on the ramp, then that's not the right place for it. Or shalot cheneged hayesod, or if you sprinkled on a side of the Mizbeach which did not have a base protruding from it. I think it's going to be useful if we quickly try and see. Are you guys seeing what happens if I open up a new tab here?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's coming up. Okay, so we're going to type in altar Beit HaMikdash and see what comes up. Is that going to be the most handy one? Well done for preparing beforehand, Rabbi Nick, right? Oh, here we go. Let's go for this one. So, I'm not sure they're seeing this on... Oh, no! Oh, no! I've just lost my recording to YouTube. Oh, no, oh, no, oh, no.
The best bits was still to come.
Yeah. Okay, we're back on here, I think. I think I'm still live. Oh, no, that's going to be annoying if that happens every time. Application window. Let's just go for this one and hopefully that'll work. Okay, so we can kind of see this this altar, and you can see it on YouTube still? On Zoom?
No.
Oh, no. Okay, hide and share screen. Evening, Richard. Okay, so here's our altar over here. So if they sprinkled on the ramp, that's not going to be good enough.
Right.
Okay, you've also got sides of the Mizbeach that have a yesod, a base, a surrounding ledge around it. So what the Mishnah is telling us is that if the sprinkling was done on a side of the Mizbeach that did not have a protruding ledge, protruding base, there were two sides that did not have this space at the bottom. So if you did it on one of those two sides, it's not going to work. So we're going to see more about this as we go along. But along the vertical face of the Mizbeach, there was a red line that went around it. And some of the sacrifices would have their blood sprinkled above this line, and some of them would have the blood sprinkled below this line. So if you had a korban which required the blood to be sprinkled at the bottom, and you went and sprinkled it at the top, or or there was a korban which you were supposed to sprinkle on the top, and you went and sprinkled it on the bottom, es hanitanim bifnim bachutz, or if there is a korban that is supposed to have its blood sprinkled bifnim, in the Kodesh HaKadoshim, in the Holy of Holies, and you went and sprinkled it on the outer Mizbeach, or v'es hanitanim bachutz bifnim, or if you had a korban that was supposed to be having its not in the Holy of Holies, on the golden altar outside the Holy of Holies. So if you had blood that was supposed to go onto the outer Mizbeach, the one that we saw in the picture, and you went and did it in the golden Mizbeach, which was inside the Heichal, says the Mishnah, Posel is going to be disqualified. However, ve'ein bo kares, there's not going to be a penalty of spiritual cutting off if a person was to eat the meat of that sacrifice after. And we're going to see more about why people may be penalized with the penalty of kares, of spiritual excision, but we're not there just yet. So we're now onto Mishnah base. And we're going to be talking now back into thinking or discussing the thoughts that people might have. You may not have done anything wrong, but you may have had the wrong kind of thoughts. We saw a little bit of this in the first chapter, but now we're going to see more about it now in this chapter. There are 3 distinct wrong thoughts that a person could have. One is called shelo lishma, which we saw already before, that you could have the wrong intention. You could have the wrong kavanah in your head of which name, which title, which category this sacrifice is falling into. The second type of invalid thought that a person could have is called chutz lizmano, right? Zman, from the word time. So if a person has the intention, as they are going through the processes of the sacrifice, that actually they are going to take part in the eating of this korban, or do different parts of the process outside of its time frame, outside of its time limit. That's called chutz lizman. So you may have in mind that you're going to do a particular service outside of the time frame that you have to process that korban. That's called chutz lizmano, and that creates a problem of pigul. Right, I'll say that word again because we're going to see it a lot. Pigul. All right. So pigul is a word that describes the disqualification of a korban, right? And the penalty, if one was to eat a sacrifice which was pigul, is the penalty, the punishment of kares, of being spiritually cut off. So it's a very, very serious one. If you have the wrong intention that you're going to do something outside of its time frame, then that korban can become pigul. And if a person eats that korban, then they can be penalized with the punishment of kares. And then the third one is chutz limakoma, right? From the word makom, that you may be intending to process this korban outside of the right place. There are different places where you can go within the temple, or even outside of the temple, even outside of Jerusalem. We're going to flesh this out more as we go along. So those are the 3 distinct wrong thoughts. Either that it's in the wrong category, or you are intending to do something at the wrong time, or you are intending to do something in the wrong place. So those are the 3 distinct thoughts that you can have. So says the Mishnah base. Hashochet es hazevach, a person who slaughters a sacrifice with the intention of lizrok damo bachutz. He is going to go and sprinkle the blood outside of the Beis Hamikdash. So which of the 3 do we think that is? Is that the wrong category, the wrong time, or the wrong place? Correct, the wrong place. Dan, I saw your lips moving, but I muted you before because there was a bit of background noise. So I'm sorry for that. But yeah, so this person is intending to sprinkle the blood in the wrong place. Chutz limakom. Or miktsas damo bachutz. Or he's just intending to sprinkle a bit of the blood outside of the Beis Hamikdash. Lahaktir es emurav bachutz. Maybe he has the intention that he is going to burn the fats outside of the Beis Hamikdash. Or miktsas emurav b'chutz. Sorry, the limbs and the fats. So maybe he's going to burn that outside. Or miktsas emurav, or maybe part of it he's going to burn outside of the Beis Hamikdash. Le'echol b'saro b'chutz. He's intending to eat the meat of the sacrifice outside of the Beis Hamikdash. If it's kodshe kodshim, right, the higher tier of sacrifices, or if it's the lower tier, if it's kodshim kalim, right, the lower tier of sacrifices, he could be intending to eat that outside of Yerushalayim, right? So he either way, he's intending to eat this sacrifice in the wrong place. Or kazayis mibsar b'chutz. He might just be intending to eat an olive bulk of the meat outside of the Beis Hamikdash. Or le'echol kazayis me'or. Or he's intending to eat an olive bulk of the skin. Or me'or ha'aliyah b'chutz. Or just a bit of the fatty tail of this animal. He's going to eat it outside of the Beis Hamikdash. Says the Mishnah, pasul ve'ein bo kares. The sacrifice will be disqualified, but he doesn't get penalized with kares. Why doesn't he get penalized for kares? Because it's not pigul. You're only going to have kares if it was pigul. And it's not pigul because it's not a case of the wrong time. It's a case of the wrong place. Now we'll see the wrong place. Lizrok damo lamachar. He's intending to sprinkle the blood tomorrow. That is chutz lizmano. That is the wrong time. Or mixas damo lamachar. Or a bit of the blood tomorrow. Lahaktire murav lamachar. Or he's going to burn up the fats and the limbs tomorrow. Or mixas murav lamachar. Or a bit of it tomorrow. Le'echol b'saro lamachar. He's going to eat the meat tomorrow. Or kazayis mibsar lamachar. Or just an olive bulk he's going to eat tomorrow. What's the implication, by the way? What if it's less than an olive bulk? We'll come to that. Or le'echol kazayis me'or ha'aliyah lamachar. Or he's going to eat an olive bulk of the fatty tail the following day. Says the Mishnah, here we go, pigul, v'chayvin alav kares. The status of that korban is now pigul, because it's a problem of intending to do something at the wrong time. And if a person eats it, they are going to be chayav, penalized with kares. Says the Mishnah, zeh haklal. This is the general rule, Mishnah Gimel. Kol hashochet, v'hamakabel, v'hamahalech, v'hazoreg. Any person who slaughters, receives the blood, transports the blood, or sprinkles the blood with one of the following intentions, right? Le'echol davar shedar kol le'echol, where he is going to eat something which you would normally eat. Lahaktir davar shedar kol lahaktir. He's going to burn something which you would normally burn, and his intention is chutz limakomo, to do it in the wrong place. The Mishnah says the rule is pasul ve'ein bo kares. It's disqualified, but there's no penalty of kares if you eat it, and I think I saw as well if you burn it. Chutz lizmano, if your intention is to do it at the wrong time, pigul, then it has a status of pigul. V'chayvin alav kares, and you're going to be liable for the penalty, the punishment of kares. Uvilvad shikrav hamatir kamitzvaso, providing that you did everything else correctly. We're going to understand what that means in the next Mishnah. Oh, very good. We're going to understand what that means. We're going to see that if there is interference with the chutz lizmano aspect, meaning that you didn't just have a thought of doing it at the wrong time, but there's also mixed into this other thoughts, then it may mean that it's not pigul. So what we're going to see is that you purely have to have designated it for the wrong time for it to become pigul. If there's other interference, it's not going to be pigul. Says the Mishnah, two possibilities of getting to Zarika with only a thought of chutz lizmano, the wrong time, so that it becomes pigul. Ketzav, karav, hamatir, kamitzvaso. How are we to understand this concept of doing everything else correctly? Says the Mishnah, shochat b'shtika. When you sacrifice the animal, you did it correctly. You didn't have any wrong thoughts. But then, kibel v'hilech v'zorak chutz lizmano. But then for the receiving of the blood, the transporting, the sprinkling, that you had the wrong intention of doing it at the wrong time. Or sheshachat chutz lizmano. Or when you slaughtered the animal, you had in mind the wrong time, that you were going to eat it tomorrow or whatever. And then kibel v'hilech v'zorak b'shtika. But then the rest of the process you did in silence. You did it with the right intentions. Or sheshachat v'kibel v'hilech v'zorak chutz lizmano. Or you did the whole process with this wrong time designation. Zehu shekarav hamatik mitzvaso. That is how we understand performing the rest of the process in its right way. There's no other interfering factor. Ketzad lo karav hamatik mitzvaso. How are we to understand the instance where you have not done the rest of these things correctly? Says the Mishnah, shachat chutz limekomo. So I've sacrificed with the wrong place in mind, it can't become pigul. Kibel v'hilech v'zorak chutz lizmano. Even if the rest of the process is done with the intention of the wrong time, or sheshachat chutz lizmano, or you've slaughtered, with the intention of the wrong time, kibel v'hilech v'zorak chutz limekomo. And then for the other three processes, you had the wrong place in mind, or sheshachat kibel v'hilech v'zorak chutz limekomo, or for all four of the processes, you had the wrong place in mind. So we're going to see all of that is not going to make it pigul. Ha-Pesach, in the case of a Korban Pesach, v'ha-Chatas, or a Korban Chatas, which if you recall in the first Mishnah was included in these categories. So if you've got a Korban Pesach or a Korban Chatas, sheshachatan shelo lishman, where you sacrifice them with the wrong name intended, but then kibel v'hilech v'zorak chutz lizmano, and the rest of the process you did with the wrong time in mind. Or sheshachat chutz lizmano, or when you sacrifice the Korban Pesach or the Korban Chatas, you had the wrong time in your mind. But then kibel v'hilech v'zorak shelo lishman. But then for the other three processes, you had the wrong name in mind. Or sheshachat kibel v'hilech v'zorak shelo lishman. Or you did all four of these processes with the wrong name in mind, which, as we saw in the first Mishnah, is problematic. That the Mishnah says is Zehu shelo karav hamatik mitzvaso. That's the example where the process was not done correctly, and so it's not going to become pigul, and so a person is not going to be penalized, punished with kares if they eat it or burn it. Says the Mishnah in Mishnah Hey. So we're going to see in a minute that Rabbi Yehuda is going to have an opinion that it all depends on what you're doing first. But before that, we're going to see as follows. Le'echol kazayis bachutz v'chazayis l'machar. A person has the intention to eat an olive's bulk outside, wrong place, v'chazayis l'machar, and a kazayis of meat tomorrow. So you've got, again, two wrong factors. I've got chutz l'mekomo and I've got chutz l'zmano. Or kazayis l'machar, the kazayis bachutz. Or I've got an olive's bulk tomorrow and an olive's bulk outside. So I have these competing wrong intentions. Kachatzi zayis bachutz, v'chachatzi zayis l'machar. Or I've got a half olive's bulk. So we're not reaching the threshold for wrongfully eating. But I've got half of that outside and half of that tomorrow. Together, I have a problematic kazayis, or kachatzi zayis l'machar, v'chachatzi zayis bachutz. So I'm planning to eat a half olive's bulk tomorrow and a half olive's bulk outside. Says the Mishnah, pasul ve'ein bo kares. The first position in the Mishnah is it's disqualified, but there's no punishment of kares because you have these competing thoughts. Amar Rabbi Yehuda, though, Rabbi Yehuda says, Ze haklal, this is the rule. Im machasheves hazman kadma lemachasheves hamakom. If the intention of time, right, the chutz lizmano intention came before, have I read that right? Am I in the right place? Yeah, came before the wrong place. So Rabbi Yehuda says, pigul v'chayavim alav kares. It depends if you have done the zman factor wrong first. If you get that wrong initially, it doesn't matter what comes after it. Rabbi Yehuda says it's going to be pigul, but that's not what the first position said. V'machasheves hamakom kadma lemachsheves hazman. But if the wrong place came before the wrong time, then even though you've had this chutz lizmano thought, the Mishnah says, Rabbi Yehuda says, pasul ve'ein bo kares. It's going to be disqualified, but there's not going to be a penalty of kares. What about le'echol kazah chatzi zayis u'lahaktir kachatzi zayis? What if a person plans to eat half of an olive's bulk and to burn half of an olive's bulk? Should they combine to be considered one olive's bulk of problematic thought? Mishnah says, kasher she'ein achila v'haktara mitzarefin. They do not combine. So you do not ruin anything if you have the intention to eat half an olive's bulk, which is not the threshold, and to burn half of an olive's bulk, which is not the threshold, even though you have two wrong intentions, because they're two different things, they don't combine. And so, says the Mishnah, it's going to still be a fit sacrifice, and as we said, they don't combine. So that is the end of chapter 2, everybody. So Mazel Tov on completing chapter 2. Any comments or questions before we go into chapter 3? There's never comments or questions from you guys. I explain everything so perfectly and flawlessly, he said in his deluded state. Chapter 3. We're going to be talking about the halachas of pigul. So we talked about this before. If a person has the wrong time intention, then it's going to potentially create a situation of pigul. So the rule of thumb is going to be that only the person doing the avoda can invalidate it. Right? So if the person doing the shchita, the kabbalah, the halacha, the zrika, the 4 processes, okay, only that person can be able to invalidate the korban and make it pigul. But that's only, as we're going to see, if they are allowed to do that particular action. If they're not, then the korban can be invalidated for other reasons, but it's not because of his mindset. So, says the Mishnah, Perek Gimel, Mishnah Aleph, Kol hapsulim shishachatu shchitasan ksheira. Kol hapsulim, which means that anybody who is unfit to do service in the temple, right? We saw a whole list of them in the previous chapter. So fundamentally, any one of those 12 categories that we saw in chapter 2, if they did the shechita san kashera, then their slaughtering is going to be kosher. It's valid. They can do shechita. As we said, even a tamei person who could use a very long knife from outside of the temple, even he could do shechita. Why? Shehashchita kashera bazarim, because shechita is permitted to be done by foreigners, meaning by non-kohanim, banashim, by women, vavadim, by Canaanite slaves, vatmeim, by impure people, afilu bekodshe kodshim, even if they're stretching all the way through to no, that's not what that means. Afilu bekodshe kodshim, even if it is a high-level sacrifice, the higher tier of sacrifices, it's still going to be permissible. Uvilvad shelo yehu tameim noigim b'basar. Just as long as an impure person, a tamei person, doesn't come into physical contact with the actual animal. So as long as that doesn't occur, then they can do the shchita. Lefichach heim poslim b'machshava. Because they're allowed to do the shchita, they can also invalidate and disqualify the sacrifice based on their mindset. V'chulan shekiblu es hadam, and all of them, if they were to receive the blood with the intentions of chutz lizmano v'chutz limakomo, if they were to do kabbalas hadam, which isn't their service to be done, so if they receive the blood with the wrong intention of chutz lizmano, outside of the right time, chutz limakomo, outside of the right place, they're not allowed to be doing this service. But if they do it with the wrong intention, so then there's a very interesting clause. There's a very interesting rule that the Mishnah presents. Im yesh dam hanefesh yachazor hakasher vikabel. to explain it primitively and superficially, if there's still a way of salvaging the situation, then the situation can be salvaged. Meaning, if there is still blood that is coming out of the wound of the animal, if there's still this life blood coming out of the throat, out of the neck of the animal, then we can still save this korban. And that means that a kosher person, a kohen, who is allowed to do the 3 other parts of the service, he can go back and he can collect the blood, fresh blood, from the wound, and he can proceed from that point on. But if you've lost that opportunity, then the sacrifice will not be able to be salvaged. Says the Mishnah in Mishnah base. We're going to pause for a moment, and we're going to discuss other things that can be corrected as long as the next part of the process hasn't yet started, or you haven't lost that opportunity. Says the Mishnah, Kibel hakasher v'noson leposel. You have a valid kohen who knows what he's doing. He receives the blood, v'noson leposel, but now he goes and gives that blood to an invalid, unfit person to continue the process. You're not allowed to do that. But if you can, yachazir lekasher. If he hasn't yet done the next part of the process, then quickly take it out of his hands and give it to someone appropriate. Kibel bimino, if he received the blood with his right hand, and if you remember, we said that service has to be done with his right hand, the nasan lesmolov, and then he goes and puts the bowl into his left hand just as he's about to start walking. You can't walk with the bowl in your left hand because you have to serve with your right hand. Says the Mishnah, yachazir limino. As long as you haven't started walking yet, then put it back in your right hand. Kibel b'kli kodesh. You receive the blood in an appropriately sacred vessel. V'nasan b'kli chol. And then you go and just pour it into some other bowl which is not sanctified. You can't do that. You can't do holacha in such a bowl. So as long as you haven't started, yachazir l'chli kodesh, then you can put it back into the sacred bowl, and then you can do the transporting. Nishpach min hakli al haritzvah va'asafo kasher. Mishnah says, if the blood spills from the vessel onto the floor and he gathered it up, kasher, it's still fit for use because he hasn't yet tried to start doing the next part of the process. Nasono al gabe hakevesh, if he puts the blood on the ramp, shelo keneged hayesod, or on a side of the altar which does not have a base point, noson esanitanin lamata lamala, or he sprinkles the blood on below the line when he should have sprinkled it above the line, vesanitanin lamala lamata, or he sprinkles above the line when he should have been sprinkling below the line, esanitanin bachutz bifnim bachutz, or he sprinkles inside on the golden altar and he should have been sprinkling on the outside altar, vesanitanin bachutz bifnim, he sprinkles on the outer altar when he should have been, or he sprinkles on the inner altar what he should have sprinkled on the outer altar. Says the Mishnah, im yesh dam hanefesh, if you've still got blood inside this animal to go and collect, yachazor hakasher vikabel, then you can go back and do it properly and still fulfill the sacrifice. Mishnah Gimel, returning to thoughts which invalidate. So we're going to see that the Mishnah talks about shchita, but it applies to the other things as well. So says the Mishnah, Hashoichet es hazevach, you slaughter the sacrifice or do any of the other 3 processes, le'echol davar she'ein darko le'echol, and you have the intention to eat something which we don't eat, right? So maybe you're planning to eat the fats. They're edible, but you don't eat them. They get burnt up. So you're planning to eat something that really you shouldn't be eating anyway. It's not part of the process to eat it. Or lahaktir davar she'eino darko lahaktir, or you plan to burn something that shouldn't be burnt. Says the Mishnah, kasher, the first position in the Mishnah is it's still fit for use. Rabbi Eliezer posel, but Rabbi Eliezer says that it's going to be disqualified. Le'echol davar shedarko le'echol, if you have the plan to eat something that you would normally eat, or lahaktir davar shedarko lahaktir, or you plan to burn something which should be burnt, but pachos mikazayis, the amount that you're planning to do this with is smaller than an olive's bulk. It doesn't meet the required threshold. The Mishnah says, kasher, you have not disqualified the sacrifice. Le'echol kachatzi zayis, ulahaktir kachatzi zayis kasher. If you plan to eat half an olive's bulk and plan to burn half an olive's bulk, together it's one full olive, but the Mishnah says, kasher, it's still fit. She'ein achila v'haktara mitzdarfin. We don't combine the threshold for eating and the threshold for burning. We don't combine these two things together. So even though it reaches an olive's bulk, we don't combine them. It's still half of an olive each, and so the Mishnah says, still kasher. Mishnah Daled. What if you have kavana to eat from 8 inedible parts of the korban? Says the Mishnah, Hashoichet es hazevach, when you're slaughtering the sacrifice or doing one of these other processes, you have a plan. I'm going to le'echol kazais min ha'or. I am going to eat an olive's bulk, but I'm going to eat an olive's bulk of the hide. Min harotev, or I'm going to eat from the gravy, which is the sauce which you would cook the animals in. Min hakipa, min hakifa, from the spices that you might put in the pot to help make this korban taste delicious. Min ha'alal, from the alal, which is the what does it say on the screen there? From a tendon in the neck, which is inedible. Min ha'tzamos, from the bones. Min hagidim, from the sinews. Is that right? Sinews, tendons. Min ha'tzlafayim, from the hoofs. Min ha'karnaim, from the horns. Chutz lizman or chutz limakomo, and you have in mind that you're going to eat these things at the wrong time, or you're going to eat these things in the wrong place. The Mishnah says, kasher, it's still kosher. Ve'ein chayavim aleihim mishum pigul v'nosar v'tamei. And a person is not going to be penalized on account of pigul, because these are inedible things that he was planning to make use of. V'nosar, he's not going to potentially violate nosar, which we haven't really talked about, but that's when you leave a korban overnight, and it takes on a new status in the morning of nosar, leftover, v'tamei. And you're also not going to be penalized if you eat these items in a state of ritual impurity. Now, that's all well and good when it comes to animal sacrifices. What about bird sacrifices? We don't do shchita on birds, so we're going to see that in a second. First of all, though, says the Mishnah, Hashoichet es hamukdashin, if when you're sacrificing a female animal, you have the intention, either in the wrong time or the wrong place, to eat le'echol shlil, you plan to eat the fetus of that animal, or shilya, or the afterbirth, the placenta of the animal, and you plan to eat it bachutz, you plan to eat it outside of its designated space, time, lofigel, you're not going to violate pigul by eating those parts of the animal. Hamolek torin, when you are doing malika, malika is the bird equivalent of shchita. So if you're doing malika to these torin, to these doves, bifnim, and you're doing it. Sorry. So you're doing right. You're doing the malika in the right place. You're doing it bifnim, inside the confines of the Beis HaMikdash. But le'chol beitzeihem bachutz. But you're planning to eat their eggs outside of the Beis HaMikdash. Lo pigel. You're not going to render that korban pigul. Chalev hamukdashin. If you plan to eat the milk of female animals, uveitze torin, and the eggs of the doves, ein chayavim aleihem mishum pigul v'nosar v'tamei. Then you're not going to violate pigul, you're not going to violate nosar, and you're not going to be in violation if you eat it when you are tamei. Mishnah Vav. Final Mishnah of tonight, of chapter 2. To make so let's see if we can understand this introduction. To make an animal pigul, you have to think about eating or burning, right? This is what we've been talking about. You have to think about eating or burning it, but there is a machlokes when it comes to passive inactions. So perhaps you're thinking about leaving something until the next day, or taking them outside of the Beis HaMikdash, but you're not sprinkling and you're not burning them. So you're not doing these fundamental actions outside of the wrong place or outside of the wrong time. So the Mishnah says, Shchato amanas lahaniach damo. you slaughter the animal, but you have the intention that you're going to leave the blood, and you're not. So I get, is that going to be? Yeah. So we're going to be leaving it. We're going to be inactive until the next day. Or as a murab, I'm going to leave the limbs until the next day. Lemachar or lahatzian lachutz, or to take them out of the designated area. But I'm not going to burn them. I'm not going to sacrifice them. The Mishnah says, Rabbi Yehuda posel. Rabbi Yehuda says it's disqualified. The Chachamim machshirin. The Chachamim say no. If you are not having a plan of actively burning, actively eating, then the rabbis say the korban is still in play. Says the Mishnah, shechato, you slaughter it al manas litno al gabe hakevesh shalok keneged hayesod. You slaughter it with the intention of placing it on the ramp, which is al gabe. Help me out here, words. Upon the ramp, yeah, there we go. Or there we go. That's what I was looking for. So you plan to put it on the ramp, or you plan to put it on the side of the mizbeach that doesn't have a protruding base. Or you plan to sprinkle. You plan to sprinkle above when you should be sprinkling below. Or you plan to sprinkle below when you should be sprinkling above the red line. You plan to sprinkle in on the out on mizbeach when you should be on the inside, or vice versa. Or you plan to sprinkle on the outside when you should be inside, or whichever way around that is. Or you plan that impure people are going to eat it, or impure people are going to sacrifice it. Or that uncircumcised people are going to eat it. Or uncircumcised people are going to sacrifice it. Or you're planning to break the bones of the Korban Pesach, which is not allowed because it has to be eaten very much not with. That's one of the rules of the Korban Pesach. You can't break the bones because that's a sign of desperation, which isn't befitting a free person on Seder night. Or you're planning to eat the sacrifice raw. Or you're planning to mix its blood with unfit blood, or blood of unfit offerings. The Mishnah says kasher, that the sacrifice could still be in play to finish it off. Because the only wrong intention that's going to disqualify it is if you have an intention of if you have an intention to do something at the wrong time or in the wrong place. And with regards to a korban pesach or a korban chatas, if you also have the intention of shalol lishman, that they are not done with the right names, with the right designation, with the right category. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, we finish chapter 3. So mazel tov, everybody, on completing Perek Gimel of Masechet Zevachim, and that's all we have time for this evening. So we will see you next week on Mishnah Mastery. In the meantime, have a wonderful and meaningful evening.